Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Munatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanna Ranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Ajana Timarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvashesha Sunyavari Pashtata Desha Dharane. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at his lotus feet. Our respectful obeisances are unto you, O spiritual master, servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Goswami. You are kindly preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Dev and delivering the Western countries which are filled with impersonalism and voidism. Hare Krishna, everybody, on what really is, for devotees of the Hare Krishna movement, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, really very much the most special, most important festival of the year. Special because it's the Vyasa Puja, or birthday, if you like, of a person that we all know either having met personally or know through his books, his audio recordings, his video recordings, etc. So it's someone so close to us. So that's why it's kind of very special. But then it's very important also, because without that personality, we wouldn't be here today doing what we're doing and having this festival, having the Janmashtami festival yesterday, and all the things that we do 365 days a year in order to try to serve Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna. None of that actually would have ever happened or taken place without Srila Prabhupada coming. And as his pranam mantras that we've just chanted indicate, to bring the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, who of course is none different than Lord Krishna, the combined incarnation of Radha and Krishna, who brought that mercy to us, to the Western countries, which, as his pranam mantras also say, are filled, these countries are filled with impersonalism and voidism. So yeah, it's such an important day for us because it's in glorification of Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada once said that I have not done anything personally or very wonderful. Of course, we would completely dispute that, but they're Srila Prabhupada's words. I have not done anything personally very wonderful. I am simply serving my spiritual master and all the previous spiritual masters in the disciplic succession, or the chain of wonderful spiritual teachers descending all the way back to Lord Krishna. So he's saying, I'm simply serving. I'm not doing anything wonderful. I'm simply serving my spiritual master and all the acharyas, or all the great spiritual masters in the disciplic succession. If I have done anything of credit, it is that I have not changed their teachings. And Prabhupada, when he was speaking those words, he also went on to say that if we do the same, meaning all of us in the Hare Krishna movement, all of us here in the Hare Krishna movement in Ireland, if we do the same and just speak what Srila Prabhupada has spoken and what Srila Prabhupada has taught us, then we can also do, not that we would want to take credit, but we could also do something very wonderful in that context then, in spreading the Hare Krishna movement. Because although Srila Prabhupada came and spread it in those Western countries, he has left, and I'll make reference to that I think later, but he has left so much work for us still to do. He came complete blank canvas with no one having done anything in the Western countries, and he started something absolutely wonderful and established Krishna consciousness in all the continents of the world. But still, as we know here in Ireland, Prabhupada never came here to Ireland, never set foot in Ireland. But now, since his departure, now we have devotees in Dublin and in Innisrath, in Belfast and other places, Carrick and Shannon and different places around the country. We have pockets of devotees, but still there are many places in the country, just a small country like Ireland, where there are no devotees, within whatever, 20, 30, 50 square miles like that. So there's a lot of work for us still to do. So today, Vyasa Puja specifically, it's about glorifying the spiritual master and thanking him for all that he has done for us, as I've just outlined, in bringing Krishna consciousness not just to the Western countries, but that we also then came in contact with it, and it's changed our lives, not just in the context of this lifetime, but forevermore in terms of our journey back to the spiritual world, which of course is our true home. So I just want to talk about some of the, glorify Srila Prabhupada for the things that he's done, but also specifically talk about, we know people are fascinated by people like Nostradamus and personalities like that who apparently predicted the future. And I guess, of course, my understanding of Nostradamus's predictions are that they're quite vague, quite general, so you could kind of, tie in many events and accredit them to his predictions like that. But either way, people are quite, first off, fascinated, but secondly, it adds real credibility, I think, if there is real substance that someone was literally predicted, and not just by another personality, but by very great personalities, up to and including, if you like, Lord Krishna himself. It gives such authenticity, and for us it's a great faith builder also, that you know, Srila Prabhupada's advent in this world and his journey to the West, this wasn't some random thing, or this wasn't just something that, you know, the stars aligned. Of course, the stars in one sense did align, but I just mean it wasn't just a random thing, or just happened by chance, or Prabhupada was lucky, or any of those kind of things. You know, this was all planned as part of Lord Krishna's mission, and more specifically Lord Chaitanya's mission, to bring the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, the Sankirtan movement, to the Western world, and indeed to the whole world like that. Because Lord Chaitanya himself, when he came just over 500 years ago, he did that in India. You know, that may be surprising to some people, but, you know, India is, if you like, the kind of home of spiritualism. But there's also a lot of, you know, things that you know, things that take wrong directions and wrong courses like that. So Lord Chaitanya came to align all that, and he preached the glories of the Sankirtan movement throughout the continent of India. But he didn't go beyond the borders like that. So this was all part of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya's grand plan. So I just want to start with a reference in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana. And it's a conversation with Ganga Devi. Lord Krishna's having a conversation with Ganga Devi. And it's predicting or describing that after 5,000 years of Kali Yuga having passed, which of course now we're roughly, I think it's, you know, roughly, you know, 5,235 or something like that, 35 years that Kali Yuga has gone. So we're 235 years beyond, you know, when this prediction was made, that Lord Krishna was saying that his mantra Upasaka, the great sage and worshipper of Krishna's holy names, will appear and will spread the chanting of Krishna's names in the form of the Hare Krishna mantra, the personification or that incarnation of Krishna in the form of his holy names, not only in India but throughout the whole world. And Lord Krishna explains that by the chanting of his holy names, the world will become spiritualized, and everybody will become a Hari Bhakta, or a Bhakta of Lord Krishna, engaging or engaged in the process of devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that was the prediction. That Krishna said somebody would come and would propagate his holy name sometime 5,000 years after Lord Krishna's own departure from this world. So the first quote that I want to take, and I'll read this, it's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, that we're all familiar with. Wonderful, wonderful verse at the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the first chapter, where the Sanskrit is Krishna swadamopagate dharma jnana dabisaha kalo nashta drisham esha puran arko dunodita. And I'll just read the English translation of that. I have the Bhagavatam here. So Krishna swar damopagate dharma jnana dibisaha kalo nasta drisham esha purana ko dunodita. And the translation is, this Bhagavat Purana, so here we have one canto of the Bhagavat Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam. This Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen. So it's risen, this sun of the Bhagavatam, the light of the Bhagavatam, has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna 5,000 years ago. So it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons, so we can now identify, this is speaking about us, persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. So persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. So we know that the world is basically engaged in the propagation of economic development. And economic development in essence is they propagate in economic development for the purpose of sense gratification, for enjoying their senses, enjoying the body, the external material body. So that's what's meant here by people who've lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance, because that, we've lost our vision if we think the goal of life is simply to enjoy our material senses. And not only have we lost our vision if we think that's the goal, but it leads to very inauspicious things, and in our future lives, etc., incredibly inauspicious things like that. So we're the people, and we of course are a little fortunate because we have now come in contact with this Srimad Bhagavatam. So many people wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about if you made reference to the Srimad Bhagavatam. So those people, they've lost their vision, but they will get light, or they can get light from this Bhagavad Purana, this Srimad Bhagavatam, from reading it, from understanding it, from associating with it like that. They can get light from this. This can basically be their route to salvation. But of course, like I said, we are familiar with that because of Srila Prabhupada. But prior to Srila Prabhupada coming, we also weren't aware of it, and nobody else was aware of it whatsoever. So how can you get light from something if you're not aware of it in that sense? That's a very hard thing to do. So that brings me on to my second reference, which you may have heard me use before, because I just personally think it is the most astonishing of references from Shastra. And this, just like the Srimad Bhagavatam, this reference goes back more than 5,000 years ago. And the Sanskrit is idam stanam parichaja videsham gamyate maya. Now this verse was spoken by Bhakti Devi, who is a personification of devotion, Bhakti, and is also non-different from Srimati Radharani, who is of course Krishna's eternal consort. So Bhakti Devi was speaking this to the best of all preachers. Srila Prabhupada in that sense is coming in a line of extraordinary preachers of spiritual knowledge, and none more so than Srila Narada Muni, the most wonderful of transcendental preachers who travels all the different universes, spreading the message of Krishna consciousness everywhere. So Bhakti Devi was speaking this, idam stanam parichaja videsham gamyate maya. And the English translation is, Bhakti Devi speaking, I will leave this place Vrindavan and travel to faraway lands to preach the glories of Bhagavatam. Now, what's so significant about this is that ever since this verse was spoken by Bhakti Devi, we have no knowledge that anyone has ever done that. And by the way, it's included in the Padma Purana. That's the reference for this verse, is in the Padma Purana, and it's in the Bhagavat Mahatma of the Padma Purana. And the Bhagavat Mahatma means the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the section in the Padma Purana. So Bhakti Devi speaking how she will leave this place, because she's speaking this to Narada Muni in Vrindavan, will leave Vrindavan, and will travel to faraway lands. So from India to America is really on the globe. If you look at the globe, it's the furthest away point really from India is America. So faraway lands is America, and that's exactly where Prabhupada first went when he left India in 1965, and he left from Vrindavan. That's where he left from, the same place that Bhakti Devi spoke these words. And of course Prabhupada, what did he do? The only thing of significance he brought with him physically was a trunk of Srimad Bhagavatams. That's what he brought with him. And then when he established ISKCON in the West, one of the main parts of the ISKCON life is the morning program, and one of the main parts of the morning program is the Srimad Bhagavatam class. So really, it's quite an extraordinary thing for me personally that a verse like that, spoken 5,000 years ago by the personification of Bhakti, somebody none different than Srimati Radharani, the eternal consort of Lord Krishna, speaks those words with those three things, leaving Vrindavan, going to faraway lands and preaching the glories of Bhagavatam. We have no knowledge of anyone who has done that in the preceding 5,000 years until Srila Prabhupada did so in 1965. So that's an extraordinary, powerful reference, predicting what Srila Prabhupada would do and cementing and underscoring what he did like that. So we can take great faith in these words of Bhakti Devi and in these words of Shastra as to how unique and special Srila Prabhupada is, and really a giant among all spiritual masters. I mean, there are spiritual masters and there are spiritual masters, and Srila Prabhupada really, is a spiritual master who Actually, his name, Prabhupada, the one at at whose feet all other masters sit, like that. And it's so appropriate for Srila Prabhupada, given all that he did. Now, another wonderful verse, that was 5,000 years ago. Now we go to around 500 years ago, and we have Lord Chaitanya speaking. And Lord Chaitanya famously said, Ebe nam sankirtan, tikshna kadaya laya, antara asura jivera, Belebi Katya. And the English translation of that is, taking the sharp sword of the congregational chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra Nam Sankirtan, which many of you today were out engaged in that very activity of Nam Sankirtan. Again, nothing more appropriate that you can do on Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day than going out and giving the Hare Krishna mantra to other people. So Lord Chaitanya said, taking that sharp sword of Harinam Sankirtan, I will root out and destroy, these very powerful words, root out and destroy the demoniac mentality that is sitting in the hearts of all living entities. The anartas, the lust, like we spoke at the beginning about people having lost their vision and thinking the goal of life is to enjoy their senses. So here the same thing. Lord Chaitanya is saying, I want to root out those anartas, those unwanted things that are sitting in the hearts of all living entities. So he's talking about lust, about anger, about greed, about envy, all of those negative qualities. Lord Chaitanya is saying, I will come with the sharp sword of Harinam Sankirtan, and that chanting of Hare Krishna will uproot all of those anartas out of the hearts of all living entities. So that's his statement. And then the second part of the same verse is that he says, Yadi papi chadi dharma dura desha yaya mora senapati bhakta yaibe tataya. If some sinful people... So again, just to put this in context, Lord Chaitanya was speaking these words while he's in India. That's where he appeared in West Bengal, in Nadia, Navadvip in West Bengal is where he appeared. And he didn't leave the shores of India. He did travel, though, around the whole of India, spreading the message of Krishna consciousness, but he didn't leave the actual subcontinent. So he's speaking there, and he's saying, if some sinful people escape his sharp sword of Harinam Sankirtan, if some people escape and they give up religious principles and go to faraway countries, again this thing, faraway lands, faraway countries, that they escape and they give up religious principles and they go to far off countries, then my Senapati Bhakta, and the Senapati Bhakta, of course, devotee means a devotee, and Senapati is a military term. It kind of means like commander-in-chief, or like a general of an army, like that. Then my Senapati Bhakta will come at that time and give them Krishna consciousness. Excuse me. So again, this reference, when Lord Chaitanya spoke these words 520 odd years ago, or thereabouts, when he spoke these words, we have no knowledge or experience of anybody fulfilling that prophecy again until Srila Prabhupada did. Now there were a couple. Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did send a couple of disciples actually in the 1930s to the West, again with that intention of trying to establish Krishna consciousness in the Western world. But they weren't successful, really. They came back sometime later, and they had distributed a few books, like that, but very, very limited or kind of no success at all, really, and nothing developed from that, or nothing took off from that. Actually, when they came back, their view was that it's impossible. These people in these Western countries, me and you and others listening, we're just too uncultured, which is probably an accurate description. But their view was that we will never be able to take to Krishna consciousness due to our lack of culture, lack of intelligence, attachment to sense gratification, etc. That was their conclusion. But however, Srila Prabhupada changed all of that. So that's that second reference then, from Lord Chaitanya about his Senapati Bhakta coming. Then Lord Chaitanya, again, quite a famous verse, the Prativite Achayata Nagaradigram Sarvatra Pachara Haibe Moranam. this reference comes from the Chaitanya Bhagavat, but Srila Prabhupada actually quotes it on numerous occasions in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. When he translates that, he quotes it many, many times. And you'll have heard this before, but that in every town and village, the chanting of my holy name will be heard. So again, you know, if you go to India, certainly certain parts of India, but really all over India, that's what you hear. It's quite amazing. You know, you can walk through villages. I've done it myself, particularly in Bengal. You might go there distributing prasadam, and you go from village to village, and everywhere in these villages people are chanting Hare Krishna, either on their own, chanting japa, or collectively gathering together and chanting kirtan like that. So that's in India. But Lord Chaitanya said in every town and village he wanted his name to be heard, or his name should be heard. So again, until Srila Prabhupada left the shores of India and came to the West, that wasn't happening. Now you can hear the chanting of Hare Krishna in so many, just now in Dublin today, but you know, we've done festival tours of Ireland, you know, and different programs like that. So many towns have heard the chanting of Hare Krishna in Ireland, but even still, actually, there are still many more that haven't. So there's still more work for us to do. But still, so many places in Ireland, so many places in England, so many places all across Europe, so many places across Africa, so many places across North and South America. They have all now heard the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. And again, it's all because of the incredible, just the incredible sacrifice made by Srila Prabhupada at such an advanced age to come out of his compassion and mercy, you know, to give that mercy of Krishna to all of us. Now, we mentioned about Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So his spiritual master, his Shiksha Guru, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he very famously said that very soon the unparalleled path of Harinam Sankirtan will be propagated all over the world. He was speaking these words in the late 1800s. I'm not sure exactly the date of this. It could have been as late as the 1890s. But anyway, it's in the late 1800s when he was saying these things, that the Harinam Sankirtan will be propagated all over the world. And then he says, oh, for that day when the fortunate, and of course you could put every nationality in here, but the nationalities he chose were that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German and American people will take up banners, mridangas, the drums obviously, and cartels, and raise kirtan through their streets and towns. When will that day come? So again, you are doing that today. Exactly what Bhaktivinoda Thakur was predicting here. Because he's predicting it, but he's not certain of when it will happen. He's predicting that it will happen, but then he says, when will that day come? So that day started in 1965 when Srila Prabhupada sat in Tompkins Square Park, initially all on his own, just checking the time here, initially all on his own, sitting in Tompkins Square Park with a pair of cartels chanting Hare Krishna. That's when Bhaktivinoda Thakur is asking, when will that day come? That's when that day came. And now, subsequent to that day, in 1965, spinning forward 50 or more years, 55 years, whatever it is, it's happening everywhere. Everywhere. He says English, yes, it's happened in England. French, yes, it's happened in France, and is happening in England, and is happening in France. Germany has and is happening in Germany. Russia is and has happened in Russia, and America is and has happened in America. So all of those countries and so many more on top of those 5 or 6 that Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned, they have all heard the chanting of Hare Krishna. So again, just a wonderful prediction. Kind of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's is sort of half request, half prediction, which makes it even kind of sweeter that he's really hoping this will happen. And again, it just shows the compassion of these personalities. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was quite old at this stage. He wasn't a young man. So he wasn't going to do it, and he wasn't even going to experience it. But he so much wanted it to happen. Why? Because these personalities know that everybody is suffering in the material world, from birth, death, old age and disease, from adhyatmic, adhibautic, adhidevic. As we see now in the society we have, Adi Atmic, Adi Potik, and Adi Davik. Let's go for the Adi Davik. I think that's the most relevant at the moment in some respects. When you have this pandemic that's hitting everybody and no one knows what to do about it, and we all have to keep social distancing and all that kind of stuff, and the thing is still spreading, and everyone's living in fear and all these kind of things. So that's an Adi Davik event. It's something that's coming from the gods, if you like, from nature like that, and we can't. There's nothing we can do about it. This time last year, practically nobody had heard of a pandemic. You may have heard of the word, but we never really identified with it. You practically never heard of it. Now there's nobody on the planet who hasn't heard of this word, and so many people have suffered, including ourselves in ISKCON, and devotees have suffered from it. So so it's out of our control. There's nothing we can do, ultimately speaking. There's things we can do, but the point is nature is so much more powerful than us. And then of course now we have the whole, even now we're in Dublin here and it's sweltering hot, but of course it's not. It's a lot hotter in other parts of Europe and the world, no doubt, but pretty hot here in Ireland. And then what does that generate? It generates thunderstorms. The next thing, we're having all these thunderstorms hitting us and places getting flooded. And there was a train crash yesterday in the UK that was a direct result of flooding from a thunderstorm like this. So this is why these personalities want to bring Krishna consciousness to the people, so the people can understand that two things really. The first thing is that we cannot control nature. There's this constant undercurrent in human society. They're always thinking we're getting more intelligent, we're advancing in so many different ways. Now they want to go to Mars and they want to go to here and they go to the moon again after 50 years. Suddenly they're deciding they're going to go to the moon again. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just find the subject so amazing. When I was a young boy, 12, 13, whatever it was, when they first started going to the moon, we were told we were going to go there for our holidays in a few years' time. It will just become the norm. But then suddenly for 50 years or whatever, a little bit less, maybe 40 years, they just never went again. And now they say they're going to go again, but it's going to take a lot of hard work and money and resources because it's very complicated getting right. Really? It's very complicated? But you did it 50 years ago, and these rinky-dinky little tin boxes that you showed us on the TV screens, it's like, now it's more difficult, even though you've advanced so much, something doesn't ring true about that. But anyway, the main point I was going to make was that there's an undercurrent in the human psyche that we're always advancing, making progress, and we're going to get a cure for cancer. We're going to be able to travel to all different places in the universe and figure out, how everything began, etc. It's going to happen. Prabhupada called that actually a post-dated check. But actually, the reality is we cannot, and we never will be able to control nature. It just isn't ever going to happen in a billion years or a trillion years. It's just not going to happen. We can't do it. Nature is working under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we're talking just zillions of times more powerful than us like that. So these personalities know that. Lord Chaitanya, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, they're all well aware of this. So, two reasons. One reason is that they want people to understand that point, that they're not the controller, they're not the center of the universe. And then the second part, of course, is but don't despair. This is how you become happy, eternally blissful, by engaging in the loving service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then all of your desires for pleasure and happiness, etc., will be fulfilled through that process. You're wasting your time trying to achieve it through this way. And most people don't understand it. They don't understand that they're wasting their time trying to be happy through material means. So therefore, that they need to hear this message of Krishna consciousness, this eternal message like that. And Srila Prabhupada, he referred to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's different references from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Prabhupada himself said that. He said, just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in 1896, actually, Prabhupada says that he sent the message of Lord Chaitanya, the message, to McGill University in the West. He sent it as a book. That was the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, is the book that he sent. And you can still see that in the letter he sent, etc. So that's all documented. And Prabhupada is explaining that was no coincidence. And now after so many years, a servant of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a servant of the disciplic succession, has come here again to continue that work. So these things are significant. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in one lecture on the Chaitanya Charitamrita that Prabhupada gave in San Francisco in 1967, Prabhupada talks again about Bhaktivinoda Thakur in 1896. And he's explaining that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is the first origin. Of course, you could argue that Lord Chaitanya is the first origin. But anyway, Prabhupada is saying that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the first origin of this movement, the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON. But he was thinking of it. And of course, we know from Krishna consciousness, there's the process of thinking, feeling, and willing. Everything starts on the subtle platform, and from the subtle, things manifest on the gross level like that. So everything starts with the thought process. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was thinking of it, and he was hoping and expecting that others would be willing in the future to take up his thought processes, if you like, the work of his thought, like. He would be hoping that others would take that up, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur was, he was an elderly man at this stage. And then Prabhupada says, well, somebody has told Prabhupada, somebody has said that I am that same man. And ironically, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, actually I think the first reference also, when he's talking about when will that day come that, English, French, German, etc., people will be chanting Hare Krishna. That he wrote that and put it in. He had a magazine called the Sajani Toshani, which originally started actually in Bengal. Then he changed it to English. He understood that better to have it in English, because then you can reach, even in India, you can reach a broader audience. And then later on, Prabhupada, that's effectively was the birth of the Back to Godhead magazine, which Prabhupada started in India in 1944, and now to this very day we still have the Back to Godhead magazine. So anyway, that reference was also written and appeared in the Sajani Toshani in 1896. So Prabhupada is talking about Bhaktivinoda Thakur's thinking of this, and his kind of request and his predictions of all of this happening with the Sankirtan movement in the West. And hoping that someone will take up that work. And then Prabhupada makes reference to it, and he says that somebody has said to him, because some people had said that to him, that they think he is the person who's doing that now. So Prabhupada's taking it in a humble way, that maybe I am that same man. And then he says, kind of like, off the cuff, if you like, he says, and ironically, I was also born in 1896. That was Srila Prabhupada's year of birth, the year that he appeared. Same year that was written in the Sajani Toshani by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So again, just amazing connections and amazing predictions like that. And then in a conversation that Prabhupada had with the Canadian ambassador, I think it was, in Iran of all places, Prabhupada visited Iran, there were some very interesting and significant conversations that took place when Prabhupada was in Iran. I won't go into them now, but they are actually very interesting. And what was the context of that? I think he quotes a letter to. He quotes a letter about. Anyway, please try to save the temple of Jiva Goswami, because in the very near future. But I'm trying to wonder why it was a conversation. Because it was a conversation, the context of the conversation with the ambassador in Iran, Canadian ambassador. Maybe, actually I'm thinking I should have checked this actually, but I'm thinking he may have been an Indian person of Indian origin. Anyway, the point was that it was mentioned that Prabhupada was pleading to this gentleman that please try to save the temple of Jiva Goswami, because in the near future many people from all parts of the world will want to come and see the temple and the samadhis of Jiva and Sanatan Goswami, or Jiva and Rupa Goswami. So just again, interesting that it's like Prabhupada with the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium when he first secured 2 acres, just 2 acres of land in Mayapur. Nothing there. There was nothing there. Literally nothing. Now it's a big kind of complex. There was literally nothing there, just rice fields, paddy fields. But then he immediately started talking about the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, and he even laid a cornerstone like that. So Prabhupada was a great visionary like that, right from very small seeds, he was immediately thinking of something ginormous. And then he talks about his own horoscope, that there was written in his horoscope that after his 70th year, which of course is also kind of amazing thing, amazing how Krishna works, that Prabhupada could have come, in his I don't know, his late 20s, his early 30s, like that, even his 40s or his 50s. And, you know, and he would have had so much more energy like that as a young man, and you would think would have achieved so much more. But it's interesting, you know, Krishna arranged that Prabhupada in his 70th year. So it says that in his horoscope, it said after his 70th year, this man, meaning Prabhupada, because this was when Prabhupada was a child, he will go outside India and he will establish so many temples. And Prabhupada says, I could not understand, what is this, that I have to go outside India? And then when he met his Guru Maharaj foretold that, in the sense that he told Prabhupada to try and spread Krishna consciousness in the English-speaking world. But he apparently, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, Prabhupada's spiritual master, he also told his godbrother, Prabhupada's godbrother, so his other disciples, some of his other disciples, Srila Maharaj was one, that he will do the needful when the time comes. Nobody requires to help him. And he told that to Srila Maharaj in 1935. And it all came true. You know, that prediction by Prabhupada's own spiritual master, that he will do wonderful things, you know, and he will go outside India and preach Krishna consciousness. It all came to pass because, you know, in 1935, when that was spoken, Srila Prabhupada would have been 35 and 4. He would have been 39. So he was 69 when he left India for America. So that was 30 years prior to it happening, actually, exactly 30 years prior to it happening. So, you know, for your ordinary person, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj is not an ordinary person, who would know? How can you know? How can we know what's going to happen? Because whether I'm here in 30 years is very unlikely. But, you know, when we were in our 30s or 20s or 30s, whatever, how would we have any idea what we would be doing or what we would have done and what we would be doing 30 years from then? It's just inconceivable to have any idea whatsoever. But Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was completely convinced that that's what would happen. And Prabhupada knew that. He knew that from different conversations he would have had with godbrothers. He knew it from his astrologer, making that kind of reference like that. So that also, I guess, gave Prabhupada additional kind of strength and faith and conviction in what he was doing. And then when he arrived in America, I think in the first year, so yeah, it was definitely in the first year sometime. Sometimes he would sit on a bench in the park, I think take a little prasadam, that kind of thing, and he's all on his own. It's quite an amazing thing, you know, all on your own in a completely different country, the city completely different culture, everything just totally different, and there you are, all on your own, as a 70-year-old man. You know, for most of us, that would be quite a daunting thing. You know, how do we deal with that? You know, and how do we manage and how do we survive? But again, Prabhupada's pure conviction and incredible faith, it didn't daunt him, you know, and he just continued on. So one day, this gentleman, who was a conductor on the New York subway, a Mr. Rubin, he engaged in conversation with Prabhupada. And he asked him, who are you and what are you doing, etc., etc. And then Mr. Rubin later on after that conversation, he said, Prabhupada, he seemed to know, we didn't call him Prabhupada, he just called him the elderly gentleman or whatever, that he seemed to know that he would have temples filled up with devotees. He would look out and he would say, and this is what he said to Mr. Rubin when he asked that question, I'm not a poor man, I am rich. There are temples and books, they are existing, they are there, but it is only time that is separating us from them. So again, just, you know, extraordinary faith and extraordinary conviction that you could make that prediction. I mean, 70 years of age, you know, any time, of course, and we can die at any time. But, you know, people getting into their 70s, I'm not sure. I think the average age for men at the moment is something like 77, I think, is it? Something like that. In the 60s, you can be sure it was considerably lower than that. So Prabhupada could have left his body at any moment, any time, but he just had, not just that he wasn't leaving his body, but that he was going to do extraordinary things with zero resources. You know, the resources came later in the form of followers, etc. But at that point, he had nothing, yet he was just so confident that all this was going to happen. And then Srila Prabhupada's own godbrothers then, different godbrothers, you know, they had, you know, these aren't so much prophecies as more like endorsements, if you like. But they talked about, one of them was talking about the return back to India of Srila Prabhupada, they felt was particularly significant. So you can imagine, Prabhupada has been in the West, arriving in 65 and 66 like that. And then he goes back to America back to India in 69, I think. And at that stage, he doesn't go back on his own. He's going back with some disciples, some followers, some disciples. And of course, they're all white-bodied people, Western-bodied people. So this is really significant because India, for the last so many 250 years or whatever, it was just seen as sort of subservient and controlled by the British, etc., and all that kind of thing, So this was a really significant thing, that here is a person born in India going to the West and then giving them the culture of India, rather than these cultures, in the case of India, Britain, that culture coming to India and dominating and trying to spread. That was a big agenda for the British, of course, when they went to India. That their whole thing was that through the educational system, they will impose their system of democracy, their culture, all their great literature, etc. That was their plan, to do that through the educational system in India, and of course, to a large degree, they did do that. But here now was an Indian sadhu traveling to America and coming back a few years later and bringing these young Western boys and girls back. And of course, just for the Indian psyche, it was slightly not so much a spiritual point, but just for the Indian psyche, that was like, wow, this is fantastic. Actually, Prabhupada called them his dancing white elephants. That's what he actually called them. And it really helped, actually. It's kind of really funny. Prabhupada goes to the West to start the Hare Krishna movement, and of course, that's his main goal, to preach in the English-speaking world. And because he's an elderly sadhu, and looks so saintly, and of course has so much knowledge, he attracts followers like that. They're very attracted by this. But then he brings them people back to India, because Prabhupada spent his whole life in India and preaching, etc., and all his godbrothers were preaching, in one sense, though, with limited success. But now Prabhupada brings back from the West, he brings back some young boys and girls with him, and that really impresses the Indian people. And more people then start taking to Krishna consciousness in India because of the fact that Prabhupada was successful in the West. So it's kind of like, it was both situations were nicely complementing each other. So this Godbrother was saying that the return of Prabhupada from the West to India with some of his followers, this was very, very significant, a meeting of the East and the West. And it signifies that, and that it is very much a spiritual point, not just the Indian sort of Western psyche thing, but it very much indicated the victory of spiritualism over materialism, because India, as I said earlier, is actually the home of spiritualism. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's the home of spiritualism like that. Whereas the West is very much the home of materialism. So this for them was showing the victory of spiritualism over materialism, or good over evil, like that. And it was a rare moment in history, because for the first time in living memory, we had Vaishnavism, or the message of Krishna consciousness, the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and devotion being carried to the West. It had been carried to the West for the first time ever in history. And not was it just being carried, as I said earlier, a couple of people did go, but this time it was being successful. And this Godbrother was saying that he's sure the historians of the future will have a lot to say about Prabhupada and his movement. And I think they want to say that those historians will likely be envious of us, because we lived at the time when all this was happening, and we were able to see it happening, and we were able to experience it like that. So they'll be envious of that. And that point about historians noting this, it's already happening to some degree, but there's no doubt in my mind that in due course of time, it will be seen for, the most significant event in the history of the world, really, the bringing of Krishna consciousness from India to the Western world. We have so many personalities that are worshipped, and rightly so, for doing, really nice things or really good things, going through great suffering, etc. So, all of the Western countries glorify their military commanders and have statues. The Brits love Winston Churchill, etc., and they have statues of him. And of of course more recently you've people like Nelson Mandela, etc., you know, being glorified for what they did, and like I say, rightly so. But somehow or another, it's easier for us, when I say us, I'm kind of thinking of people who aren't maybe necessarily so focused on spiritual things or spiritual life. It's easier for people like that to recognize material achievements. Spiritual achievements are more subtle, you know, and they're kind of, you know, people can't, more difficult for them to grasp them. But in due course of time, I have very little doubt that, you know, Srila Prabhupada and his achievements will be recognized in the correct way and for what they are. So there are all the different kind of predictions and endorsements and appreciations of Srila Prabhupada. I was going to say, is there any questions? Now I just realised that we're not in that space of questions. This is just done online. Maybe what I'll do is I will. Well, let me. I did say I'd make reference to that point about work, leaving work behind. That was a conversation between Prabhupada and one of his devotees. When the devotee asked Prabhupada, he said, "Why is it that Lord Chaitanya?" He obviously wanted to. He said he opened the storehouse of love of God, and he wanted to flood the world with Krishna consciousness, and he wanted Krishna consciousness spread to every town and village. Why didn't he do it himself? You know, because after all, he's none different than God, and or he is God. And Prabhupada's simple response was, and the devotees laughed at it when Prabhupada said, he said, "Oh, he left the credit for me and for all of you to actually do that." So that really is an important thing for us, that Prabhupada did extraordinary things, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything, you know. And Prabhupada wanted us to do that, and he said it time and time again. In one of his famous Vyasa Puja addresses on his spiritual master's appearance day, or was it his disappearance day? Anyway, one address that he made in relation to his own Guru Maharaj was that he was saying that who would ever think that I would have left India? Who would ever think that I would have made it to America? Who would ever have thought that I would have had some success, and who would have ever thought that I would have met all you boys and girls, and that you boys and girls would have taken to Krishna consciousness and then helped me in so many ways? Who would have thought all these things could happen? And Prabhupada says, that was Krishna's plan. And even though things may seem impossible, that as long as we have faith in the words of our spiritual master, so as long as we have faith in the words of Srila Prabhupada, then Krishna, as long as we have faith in the words of our spiritual masters, and as long as we follow what they say, and as long as our motivation is to do the right thing and not to do something for our own selves, for our own sense gratification, then Krishna will provide all facilities. Do not doubt. So we also, if we're in that consciousness and in have that mentality of just wanting to do exactly what Srila Prabhupada told us to do, and to do it in an unmotivated way, then Krishna will provide all facilities, and so many wonderful things can happen as a result of that. So today is Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day, which, no coincidence again that it just happens to be the day after Krishna's birthday, and always is the day after Krishna's birthday. So, you know, there's another ringing endorsement, for want of a better way of putting it, but another ringing endorsement in terms of Srila Prabhupada's significance and glories, that his birthday falls the very next day after Lord Krishna's. So what I was going to finish with, given that I can't ask any questions, was I was just going to read my own offering, my own Vyasa Puja offering this year for Srila Prabhupada, which actually is a very short offering. Yeah, it's a very short offering. So I'll just get it here and I will read it. I have it here somewhere. Oh, Krishna. I'm sorry, I should actually have this ready, I understand that. Oh, I think I have it here. Bear with me. Just 1 second, yes, I think this is it, yeah. No, I just have to find my own. And then I think, I guess Manu Prabhu, you're there. You can invite all the different devotees to say a few words of appreciation for Srila Prabhupada. And literally, sometimes these occasions can be a little challenging for us to speak. But literally, if it's just to say thank you, come up to Srila Prabhupada's picture, etc., and just say thank you, Srila Prabhupada, thank you for all that you've done. That's kind of what I've done this year. I found it after all that. So, dear Srila Prabhupada, please accept my humble obeisances at your lotus feet. For sure, the world needs the glorious message you delivered to us when you arrived in America in 1965, arguably now more than ever before. May I be so cheeky as to ask you for something on this most glorious day of your Vyasa Puja. My request is to inspire us all to be so much more effective in spreading far and wide the message you gave us. We have made some progress since you left, but there is so much more we need to do. Thank you. I fall at your lotus feet in awe of all that you did on behalf of your beloved Guru Maharaj and Lord Krishna. Your inspiration is an ever-increasing reality for me, and I offer you my sincere thanks for that sublime benediction. Hoping to be your eternal servant, Praghosa. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Manu Prabhu. I think I will now hand over to you. Thank you.